I'm going to introduce the panelists one at a time here. Our first panelist is Vinny Corrao. Vinny is a longtime friend and colleague of the ITC. He used to work for the Nez Perce tribe. He's presently the president of Northwest Management Incorporated. Vinny has been a participant and an active member of the ITC Branding and Marketing Study and the IFMAT report. Vinny is also coordinating the Anchor Forest project. Vinny, I think I was just tempted to introduce him as the Italian Iron Chef of the ITC world. So, Vinny, can you share your wisdom with us?
Thank you, Gary. You know, there's two envious positions at a conference of this size is right after lunch and the last speaker of the day. I won one of them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you a quick story, just get everybody settled in. I did, many of you know, worked for the Nez Perce tribe for 10 years as a tribal forester. It was one of my first professional positions, probably over 35 years ago now. But one of the great moments for me as a young professional was when I was asked to, by the tribal chairman, to go to Portland to meet with the BIA and then on to Washington, D.C. to do some tribal business. And you can imagine for me, kind of an Italian immigrant out of Boston, to go and be with the tribal chairman and go flying around to Portland was a great experience. I went with I went with the forest manager at the time, Roger Van Houten. Some of you may remember Roger, and another wildlife biologist named Keith Lawrence. Keith Lawrence is about 6'5". He is a rather tall, strapping guy. And we were walking out to the tribal plain, and we were huddled around the chairman, just, you know, all excited on this big trip. And Keith hit his head on a strut of a parked plane, went down in his brand new suit. He has about as much hair as I do, and tore his pants. And we picked Keith up. It kind of broke the moment. And Chairman Pinkham turns to us and goes, "Man, they park those planes anywhere." So it was welcome to tribal forestry. Anyways, with that, got everyone started here. I'm going to give you an overview real quickly of the Anchor Forest pilot concept that was started by the Intertribal Timber Council about 5 years ago. And it has three major goals. And the first 4 or 5 slides, I'm going to move rather quickly because Gary, Jim have covered some of the findings that we are experiencing, that we research as we go through the Anchor Forest concept. But the 3 points of the Anchor Forest pilot is to restore capacity and infrastructure, coordinate management across ownerships, and to provide the economic, social, and benefits to local communities. We did produce a definition of what an anchor forest is. It's a rather large landscape, support long-term sustainable practices, backed by local infrastructure, technical expertise, endorsed politically, and to achieve the desired results out there on the landscape. The Anchor Forest pilot is made up of 3 areas, the South Central, the North Central, and Northeast. The North Central and Northeast pretty much splits the Colville Reservation on both sides, east and west. The south end of the South Central study area is the Yakima. The study focuses on eastern Washington. There's a lack of infrastructure in eastern Washington, and there is a tremendous forest health issue there. So this pilot is to look at a series of different attributes, opportunities, barriers, and challenges. So first thing, Anchor Forest is not just timber harvesting. We're dealing with people, with place, communities, but on top of all that, we want to deal with sustainability. Now, you heard some of these points were made by earlier speakers. Why Indian forest? Because we feel that the tribes are the key. and they're the key because of the permanent land base and the commitment to long-term management. You heard the term triple bottom line, dealing with economic, environment, and cultural. They have the management expertise as well as the examples. They can bridge the gaps, particularly with traditional ecological knowledge and Western science. They have the reserved and treaty rights, and also their political and legal relationships with the federal government. The Anchor Forest has 6 deliverables, and I'm not going to go through anything too deep on this, but we are going to deal with infrastructure analysis of what's available out there as far as milling capacity to maintain healthy forest. We're looking at the Taposh Collaborative in particular, but we're looking at collaboratives in general to see how they work. We're looking at institutional capacity, barriers to collaboration, database development, just to keep track of all the information so that folks can find the data, where it came from, and where you can access it. And then qualifying the non-market values, which is really ecosystem services and where they fit in on a landscape management basis. So the Anchor Forest is an integrated assessment dealing with infrastructure, overcoming barriers, and institutional capacity. So the next few minutes I'm going to focus on what's in yellow there within each study area. We'll talk a little bit about our findings and the components influencing forest management, talk a little bit about barriers or obstacles, and then we're going to talk about the potential for multi-jurisdictional management. Okay, going across the ownership on the landscape, what's the opportunities there to do that? So the first part, components of influencing forest management. We found that each collaborative that we looked at was structured differently. Some are stakeholder-based, some are landowner-based. None of them, or any 2 of them, were the same. Even though we focused on the Taposh Collaborative, we've had the opportunity to work with several collaboratives, and we found that they were all very different. Obviously would affect forest management. We found that financial support for collaborative participation and planning is needed. A lot of cost into planning, a lot of time invested in these collaboratives. Some of the areas have sufficient infrastructure and some do not. That makes a big difference on what you can do on the landscape. Taking on projects off reservation for the tribes puts strain on tribal resources. It's very difficult for the tribes to just jump on and take on a big project without it impacting their existing operations. Also, we found that the Forest Service and tribal staff are not familiar with implementing projects regardless of the type of authority you might use, and we heard a little bit of that already. So continuing with influencing management, balancing the social, cultural, and environmental objectives, a big challenge no matter where you are. Addressing climate change and how we're going to deal with fuels and smoke management across different ownerships and across different management authorities. We did surveys. Now, a little background, we did 2 big focus meetings, one at the Yakima and one at the Colville, plus multiple meetings with stakeholders and interested parties. And we also did 2 surveys to try to survey key people within the study areas to see what they felt. And so one of the survey results was the 70% of the resource people and the key stakeholders felt that forest management improves ecological and watershed conditions. Survey also found that only 40% felt that collaborative efforts are effective. And several of the comments made stated that the collaborative process with ESA and the conflicting environmental requirements are too slow to address forest health issues. So that was some of the comments, and you've probably experienced that, but we also have some findings that help bolster those actually to a positive side. Let's jump into barriers and obstacles. Of course, NEPA, anyone who's been involved with NEPA, the process is slow and time consuming. The collaborative process requires support from the federal agencies and a champion to move effort. We already heard that from Jim. We've heard that from several other folks. We need a champion from the federal side to stay with it. That collaborative process takes significant time and effort over a long period with dedicated participation. We find that the U.S. Forest Service staff move frequently, which lengthens the process. And it actually is counterintuitive when you start talking about collaboration because it's a long-term strategy. We find a lack of leadership and commitment from the Forest Service staff, and the comment is that they fear losing job advancement opportunities. Now, we feel this could be addressed easily by just providing the incentives and encouragement when Forest Service folks do a good job in collaboration, do a good job in leadership, give them the promotions, let them stay where they are, let them do their job. Collaborative authority needs to be binding, participation should be required. We found two things under the collaborative authority. One is when you invest years in a collaborative situation, non-players to the collaborative process can then appeal or contest legally. This is a real discouragement for the collaborative participants. On the other side, you have companies investing, often volunteering hundreds or thousands of hours or years to do a collaborative, only to have another company that's not been involved in the collaborative come and outbid them at the time that the stewardship contract comes about. So again, a disincentive that doesn't help the collaborative process. What we also found for barriers and obstacles is that we need a champion, not only on the federal side, but we need them on the tribal side to help to direct those projects. We need to develop a united voice that is clear and consistent so that at least on the area or the topic that we're talking about, we can all, on the different landowners, share the same feelings to get things done. You have to identify the specific authorities for each landowner to work into the Anchor Forest strategy. You heard a couple of the folks talk about the way they work with their environmental assessment or their employment hiring. Each organization has specific needs in how they would initiate the different contracts or authorities. Those need to be identified. And we need to identify the funding, particularly, again, as I said, for planning and collaborative participation, because this is a long-term, costly endeavor. You need to invest time to build relationships with key resources. The most successful collaboratives are the ones where there's been trust built, and you can't build trust overnight. It takes time. So, potential for multi-jurisdictional management. It does exist. We particularly see it favorable in the agencies, a little bit more with the states, certainly with the tribes. We see the interactions with the private are possible. We see a lot of private folks putting sensitive acreages now into conservation easements that help fill out the landscape and protect those landscape amenities. And also, any of the mills that are outside the reach of a tribal mill are definitely going to be interested in the Anchor Forest concept being successful. But time and effort is needed to develop the long-term strategy. The key thing is we need multiple partners. We need, 2 may be okay, 3 is better, 4 is great. You need to have multiple partners to move it forward. There needs to be a common vision. And it needs to be a prioritization of projects that everyone can agree on. You need to understand the tools, whether that be stewardship contracting, Tribal Forest Protection Act, the CFLRP, co-op stewardship agreements, the good neighbor policies, mostly the states, or any MOUs. There are several tools that are available that the Anchor Forest Project has been researching that may fit best depending on the group that is participating across the landscape. So some of the key potentials we see is that there's millions of acres. I've heard anywhere from 80 to 100 million acres are in need of restoration and thinning. That comes right out of the Forest Service data. So the opportunity potential is definitely there across the landscape. There's approximately 300,000 acres of reservation boundary adjacent to federal lands that we heard earlier that's been threatens tribal resources. Stewardship contracting has been claimed by the chief as the preferred method of authority, and we are seeing some improvements there. I'll share that here in just a moment. We do have momentum. We have momentum from the IFMAT report. We have momentum from the tribal forest protection work that Jim has done meeting with the Forest Service. And there is a platform set for change, and we are seeing some positive movement. And the tribes, we are seeing the tribes and the Forest Service implement more tribal forest protection projects, and the Yakima are working on one now, and so are the Colville, actively pursuing those. So every tribe knows this, particularly in the West. We use it or lose it, and the tribes have always been good at looking at the forest as a whole. And that's why the tribes, we feel, are the anchors for change, because of all the different amenities here and all the different interests that the tribes have in focusing that. So let's look at the opportunities. I get a lot of folks say, oh, collaboration, it's not working, it's taken a long time, stewardship contracting, and that's all true. But we looked at Region 1, Region 5, and Region 6 on how much federal volume has actually moved in the last 4 years. Now, this is sawlog volume. Most, I would say probably a high percentage is fire, but it's also timber sales, stewardship contracting. And in Region 1, the last 4 years, the average per year, 240 million board feet. Region 5, 370 million board feet. Region 6, just a little over 1 billion board feet. These are averages the last 4 years. So we are seeing improvements in what we're doing, whether it's through collaboration, whether it's through fire salvage, whether it's through stewardship contracting. So the tribes have known for a long time the landscape, across the landscape is important. We've heard it from several other speakers, and as here has been mentioned by Chief Seattle, it's attributed, all things are connected, wherever befalls the earth, befalls the sons of the earth. Thank you.